All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome and good evening to this virtual event from Majors and Quinn Booksellers. My name is Steph Gorney. I am a bookseller here at Majors and Quinn. We are an independent bookstore in Uptown Minneapolis, if you are unaware. If this is your first time at one of our virtual events, welcome. If it is not your first time and you are coming back for a second or third or fourth, who knows, event, welcome back. We're so thankful that you are taking the time out of your day to spend with some of our amazing authors, and we really appreciate your continued support of our program. So I'm going to do a quick intro of the authors that we have this evening. So the featured author is Kristen Radke, and her new book is coming out, or has come out this past week, excuse me, and that is, of course, The CQ, the book that we are here to talk about tonight. And she is joined by Rachel Yoder, who is the author of Night Bitch, coming out this coming Tuesday. Keep your eyes peeled. And Zaina Arafat, who is the author of You Exist Too Much. So before we get into their conversation, just a quick heads up, talk to us in the comments, please. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. And also, if you have any questions for any of our authors, you can shoot them there. We'll be doing a quick 15-minute Q&A at the end of the session. So with all of that out of the way, I will take myself off screen and hand it over to these three ladies. Thank you.
So great to be here. Thank you so much to our hosts, and so great to be up here with Rachel and Kristen.
Yeah.
Everybody.
So I think Zaina's going to start us off with a reading, but I wanted to say just a little something cheesy and sappy. I'm also going to read a very sentimental part tonight, but I just wanted to say that when I thought about, okay, what do I want to do for my virtual book tour and thinking about loneliness, I was like, I want to just hang out with my friends who made me so much less lonely during the pandemic. And these two ladies have been such a huge part of that. So they're amazing. You should please buy their books if you haven't already. And I'm so excited to hear you guys read tonight.
Thanks, Kristen. Thank you for asking us, inviting us to be part of this.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank goodness for both of you, because you made the pandemic a lot less lonely. So I am just going to read a couple pages from my novel. Okay. And I'm not going to give any setup or anything. It's just the sort of vignette that comes somewhere in the middle of the book. All right. By mid-July of my childhood summers in Jordan, I was homesick for America. I'd make a list in my journal of the things I missed most about the States. Peanut butter, cow's milk, Nickelodeon, grass, Heather, my next-door neighbor and best friend. From a distance, the US seemed so beautiful, so welcoming, so easy. How could I spend a minute unhappy there? I promised myself that when I returned, I would appreciate every little thing. This heightened fondness for the States lasted for the duration of the car ride from Dulles Airport to our house. The first night back in my bed always felt strange, like it was someone else's. By the time school started the next day, I was desperately lonely, desperately missing Jordan. Longing was a lonely, ambiguous space. I'd long for nights on Teta's veranda, watching her lay out Arabic newspapers and roll grape leaves, the combination of watermelon and halloumi cheese, fried falafel balls poking out of oil-soaked paper bags, roadside fruit tents with peaches spilling off the display and onto the earth, the sound of the three-stringed oud coming from the wedding at the nearby hotel, the sight of the green-lit minarets and the muezzin's lyric voice calling everyone to prayer. Above all, I longed for the smell of jasmine flowers that were outside every apartment building, though curiously, I hardly noticed them while I was there. It seemed I could only ever smell them from thousands of miles away. Thank you. That's it.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I can totally relate with the feelings of longing and loneliness being connected. That was beautifully rendered.
Oh, thank you, Rachel.
So I guess I'm going to go next. Mine is a Mine is a way different vibe, Zaina.
That's what makes it fun.
Okay, so this is from my book Night Bitch, which comes out next week. It's about the main character in the book is a mom, a stay-at-home mom who has given up her dreams of being an artist to be home with her child, and it thinks she might be turning into a dog. She's had some stuff happen before this excerpt I'm going to read. She's gone on some runs around the neighborhood. She had a perplexing visit from a trio of dogs who showed up in her lawn. And this is her at Book Babies, which is a program at the library. And she is feeling lonely in a room full of people, which is how I most often feel lonely. So I'll read. At Book Babies, mothers and children crowded into the library's back room, where a chirpy librarian showed them books and puppets and sang songs, after which toddlers crawled and walked and teamed over one another, a squirming mass of fists and baggy diapers and two big heads. Sure enough, there were Jen and Babs and Poppy engaged in their usual happy animated conversation. Night Bitch sat in the only open space still available on the floor, closer to Jen than she would have liked, for she wasn't sure what to say or how to be. Night Bitch nodded formally, awkwardly, when she caught Jen's eye, then flushed red. Were they? Weren't they? She's wondering if they were the dogs who showed up on her lawn. How preposterous even to entertain that these women had visited her house, ripped her clothes from her body, then left behind a pile of dead vermin for her enjoyment. Oh, there was also some dogs that came in the night. She was just going to sit there and participate and be a normal mom. That was it. She listened as the other mothers, the contented mothers, talked about their best recipes that the kids would eat. They all seemed to be friends. She didn't make eye contact, instead looked at her phone and felt slightly superior for not caring about leggings and essential oils. She felt educated. She felt interesting and independent and didn't want to be like the happy mothers. Was it that she didn't want to be happy? That wasn't it. It was that she wanted another option. All the while, she shot surreptitious glances at the hardcore book mommies, those mommies who were really into being mommies and selling herbs and enriching their children all the time. Chief among them, of course, Jen, her curled eyelashes and penciled brows, concealer that must have been painstakingly applied so as to cover every blemish, the smallest imperfections. Her fingernails were manicured, as were her toenails. Her legs were shaved. She smiled and chatted easily about herbs, how she loved Mombi, whatever that was, on those days when she woke up with the grumpies, as if this mother, this Jen, even had a true working understanding of the grumpies. Night Bitch wanted to say, you don't even know what the grumpies are. Have you ever yelled at your twins in full voice in the middle of the night? Yelled at them to go back to sleep, pumping your diaphragm with rage and sound? Have you sobbed beside them when they asked for another glass of water, another snack at 10 p.m.? Just really let go and had a full-on snot fest in front of your children so they were the ones comforting you? Have you ever locked yourself in the bathroom for 20 whole minutes to peruse your phone while your child bangs on the door and yells "Mama" as loud as he can until he is sobbing and probably permanently traumatized? Sometimes, Night Bitch longed to say, stunning all of them into a sweet-smelling silence, I fantasize about getting in my car and driving through night and day as far south as I can go until I get to a dirty beach and check in at a cut-rate motel where I'll drink horrible pina coladas all day in a faded beach chair. Sometimes Night Bitch imagined uttering plainly to their beautiful, happy faces, I imagine abandoning my family, abandoning this entire life. So don't invoke the grumpies unless you've really got them, she wanted to scream. Just don't. As the librarian read about a sad giant who just needed a hug, Night Bitch studied Jen down to the white tracks of foundation collecting in the fine wrinkles around her eyes. Had this other woman, this perfect mother, turned into a dog recently? Had she gallivanted about town? How was a person to tell which mothers changed and which didn't? Surely she couldn't be the only one. A horrible loneliness bloomed in her chest when she imagined herself the only mother in the room, in the entire world, to roam the silent, lamplit streets, part woman, part beast. That's it.
So exciting to hear you read from that book. It's the first time I've ever heard you read from it. I can't wait.
Thanks, Kristen.
These are both so beautiful. Okay, I'm going to read very briefly from the end of Seek You, A Journey Through American Loneliness. And the book gets its name from my dad. When my dad was a kid, he got really into ham radio, into amateur radio. And when you call out across amateur radio, it's called the CQ call. And you're just like, it means like basically, is there anyone out there? And anyone can answer. And over time, people took it to sound like seek you instead of the letters CQ. And that's where the title comes from. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. When I was about the same age as my father was when he spent his nights making CQ calls on ham radio, I courted my radio too. Each Sunday night, I lay in bed and listened to Casey Kasem's Top 40 Countdown, his smooth elder voice a clockwork comfort. He signed off each program by saying, "Keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars." It felt like the most beautiful, most true platitude I had ever heard. I didn't listen for the popular songs, although I often liked them, and heard myself in all the angst sung about the kinds of love I was many years away from feeling, but I thought I already understood. I listened for the reader-submitted letters that Casey read throughout the show, long-distance dedications in which a person wrote about someone far away and asked Casey to play them a song. The narratives in the letters were sometimes ordinary, like when someone's husband was transferred across the country for work or deployed overseas and they were making it work apart for a while. The song in the letter was a testament to the reunion they would someday have and the unbroken bond they'd maintain until then. But more often, the letters were pleas for repair, with an estranged parent or a former lover or a friend who'd wronged and wanted things right again. The subtext of all these letters, no matter what hope the writer reached out with, was that resolution wasn't coming. The song was simply a song to that loss, a performance of grief and regret to someone who would not or could not be listening. I felt comforted by their stories. I'd experienced so little, and their letters were an outlet for the misplaced pain I didn't have an excuse for. A woman's best friend had died, so now she went to the movies alone each week, no longer saving the seat next to her. A father regretted leaving his son when he'd conceived him much too young. A sister wrote to say, "I wish I could find my brother." An ineffectual way to express longing is through a gesture that must have rarely yielded results, but maybe the act of telling was the catharsis many were writing toward. These were personal letters, mailed to a stranger who read them to millions of people, and that seemed to me very brave. The intensity of my loneliness at 33 is unmatched to what it was when I was lying in bed with the radio at 9 or 12 or 15, though now it is much deeper, and I understand its cost. I know that some of us will do anything we can to keep ourselves from feeling alone, or to remain tethered within the everyday. I know, too, how so many of us fail, building ourselves a little world of isolation from which we're unable to break free. I want us to use loneliness, yours and mine, to find our way back to each other. I want us to play songs for each other on the radio. And when we call out across an airwave or a telephone or a chat room or an app or a city street or an open field or a bedroom, I want us each to hear, miraculously, a voice calling back.
That was so nice.
Love
And
that.
it encompasses so much, like so many different facets of not just loneliness, but also sort of like the pleasures of being alone.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because I think listening to the radio for me, I also listen to Casey Kasem.
I mean, okay, so there's this documentary coming out about Casey, or this podcast. Have you heard about the Casey Kasem podcast?
No.
Okay, apparently he was like a victim of elder abuse. It's going to be an intense listen. So be prepared for that.
That sounds tragic.
Yes, truly. I don't know why I'm saying it in such a good way. It's really horrible.
That sucks. But like, yeah.
But there was something really like pleasurable about being alone and listening to like Casey Kasem's Top 40 by myself. Like it was a great experience of aloneness.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily feel lonely. But then there's also, I remember experiences like live radio and like watching the Super Bowl, which I had no interest in football, but there was something about feeling like you're not alone during this kind of like live televised or radio presented events that we've sort of, I don't know, I guess you kind of maybe get that on Twitter, but there's not really that shared thing anymore.
Well, it does feel like you want to be like there for like the cultural moment. Like sometimes when it's raining or like if it's storming in New York, I'll like go on Twitter because I'll be like, people are going to talk about the storm and I want to see people talk about the storm that I'm experiencing. But it's like the same thing. I think the same reason we like sought out any sort of event in that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's really like why I watch award shows. They're really, you know, because I'm like, oh, I just want to do something that other people are doing at the same time they're doing it and feel good in that way.
Yeah.
Zaina, I was so interested in the excerpt that you read, you were talking about like as soon as you left a place, you were like longing for the other place. Mm-hmm. And I feel like you still do that.
100,000. Of course. I mean, it's funny because if I may divulge some information, I was just recently with Kristen, like in a place, and I made the decision to leave. And the second I left, I was like, oh my God, I miss this place so much. I want to be back there. And as you say, it was torture. And as you say, literally, I'm always, and I wonder to myself, I'm like, is that a facet of growing up like in between two places? Is that I'm always in a state of longing for the place that I'm not and the place that I've just left. It's almost like every time I leave a place, I know I'm going to go through this like terrible, terrible, excruciating pain. So yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think that is it like you feel like split or divided in some way, or you feel like you should be both places? Like, what do you think it is?
I think it's just this, like, I'm just conditioned to be, I think by virtue of having grown up that way, literally like split between the States and the Middle East, I'm just sort of conditioned to always be longing because part of me is always somewhere else. Because like, that's what being, I guess, bicultural is like a part of you somewhere else. And so I take that and I like apply it to all situations going forward, including like, you know, a little vacation with my friends. It's like I feel like I'm split between where I am and where I just was. So I don't know. Do either of you relate to that feeling? I'm curious. I hope not.
Yeah.
It's painful.
I mean, I forget which writer wrote this beautiful phrase, which I think about a lot. And if someone recognizes it, please tell me. But someone said it was a kind of premature nostalgia. And it's sort of adjacent to what you're saying, Zaina. It's not exactly the same, but I find myself like in a moment being like, I'm going to miss this moment so much when this moment is over. Like, I feel like I'm mourning the loss of something, like while I'm inside it. Like, I can like hold my cat and be like, I love my cat so much. And then the next thought is, and someday my cat will be dead and I won't have my cat anymore. You know, it's like that with everything of like, the joy of an experience is like also like combined with a kind of sadness because it's not infinite.
Right. That it's like tainted by the fact that it's going to end at some point. Like, oh, completely. Yeah. Absolutely. I love that premature nostalgia. I think that really, that makes a lot of sense.
I think Rachel's just being quiet because she's much more well-adjusted than we are.
I know. Rachel's like,
I was thinking about it. I never have an answer right away. I have to always think about it, but
me too.
I think I was much more, yes, I definitely relate with that longing. And I think it was much more present for me in my 20s because my life was so up in the air, and I didn't, I had like left my Mennonite family, my Mennonite community, and like was kind of estranged from that identity. And I did have this feeling of like, I don't know where my place in the world is. I feel like I'm not whole. I feel like I'm split. And so because that was sort of an unresolved question, there was always this sense of like longing to be someone else or somewhere else better, And I think now my life is kind of more resolved in a way and boring. But there are like different sorts of lonelinesses to experience in that. Yeah.
But it also feels like Night Bitch is also sort of like a loneliness for a kind of like recklessness that was once possible that like isn't anymore.
Yeah. It's about like being estranged from yourself.
Yeah.
Like being estranged from the vitality of the self. And that's a pretty, existential, horrific sort of loneliness.
And it seems like it's I was just thinking it's also like the sort of loneliness of not meeting certain like expectations that come with the territory of motherhood in some sense as well. I mean, I just like listened to that section that you read about the baby. Like, I can just picture that scene so well of like the mom's all so excited to be there, and it's like you're supposed to be excited to be there, but in some way, you're in a totally different head. I mean, like it's weird to suddenly become something and be expected to embrace all aspects of that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something like all writers to a certain extent experience, like the loneliness of the outsider, the loneliness of like being somewhere and not feeling like you perfectly fit in or can perfectly perform what everyone else is performing around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But when I talk to people about loneliness, I had a lot of women talk about like early motherhood as a very lonely moment, which I think is so interesting because like if you were to look at like a stock photo website of like young mom with baby, it's like just like joy. And like it's like there's sort of like this external projection of like you've never been less alone in your life than when you've made something with your body, but yet that's kind of also like a lie, or that's not the whole truth of it.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, yeah, I have also heard that. I thought I was like alone in my isolation in early motherhood. Something was wrong with me, that like, why was it so difficult? Like, why could I not make friends? And then as I started to talk about it, everyone's like, oh no, yeah, I felt that way too. And I think, it has something to do with, us not like living close to our families anymore. A lot of us like living very far away. We don't have that sort of built-in community. And also just the fact that like, as the mother, you are tied in this very physical, biological way, in a way that no one else is, you are, only you can be the mom. Yeah. And that responsibility can feel, really isolating and lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. It's only you. Yeah. I like
so
that.
When did like that, do you still feel that way, or did that begin, did you feel like that began to sort of like dissipate and lessen as your child got older?
Well, I was texting with both of you today earlier, and I was saying, I have some thoughts on loneliness and perfectionism. And I think this ties into when I feel the most lonely in parenthood is when I am stressed out and overperforming and trying to do everything. When I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, when I accept every expectation, that society would like to give me, or, whatever messages I have. That's when I feel really lonely, when I'm like, I have all this stuff to do for my book. I have, I should go work out. I should go and get like really healthy groceries, like this like list in my head. And I need to care for my son, and I'm not caring, I'm not being with him in a really present way, which is what I should, like, just the constant critic is up there. And that's when I feel the loneliness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Today, I was like, holy smokes, completely the loneliness of perfectionism. And like yesterday, I was about to break, and I mean, in a totally different context, it's like as a teacher, I guess in any sort of service one is providing, one runs the risk of completely like depleting oneself and feeling totally alone. But the student told me, who I sort of like broke a boundary and like confided in, he's like, oh, because he was like, you just need to suck more, or be like okay sucking. And I was like, oh, that's such a great point. I never thought about that. Like, just suck. You know? So yeah, there is a loneliness too. Like, I can only imagine the kind of perfectionism you're up against right now, with all of those facets of your life coming to a head. But like, it's a very interesting, I don't know. Kristen's you seem like a perfectionist.
Yeah, definitely. But I feel the loneliest when I feel like I'm sucking the most. Like I guess I feel like I can get very distracted by tasks, and tasks make me feel not alone because it's like I'm like in service of something. Like to me, like loneliness really sets in when I'm like, I think that boredom and loneliness are very intertwined, because if I'm like deeply engaged in something, there's no room to like have that kind of longing for me. Like, which is, I think, like, that's how I define the distinction between solitude and loneliness to myself, because solitude feels good when it's in service of something. But I think my main problem I have is that I'm always like, how do I make this thing worth it? Like every single thing throughout the day of like, am I doing enough? Am I enough? Like kind of constantly. And so when I feel like I'm not is when I start to feel like that sort of existential aloneness that feels like it just like seeps into everything.
Yeah. Well, that you bring up an interesting point about solitude versus loneliness. And I'm wondering for both of you, what is something that feels really great? You know, like a type of solitude that feels maybe like restorative or generative rather than this thing that depletes you or sends you into an existential tailspin. Is there anything?
Right.
Yeah.
Or what do you like to do when you're alone? That like
I mean, like in the before times, like when we were traveling more, like having like a glass of wine on an airplane with like that cheese box, you know, it's like the cheese and nuts and like some grapes, and you're like, I don't want these grapes. What a joke. It's like hilarious. I think I want to eat a grape right now. And then you watch like the worst movie that's ever been made, and it's just like you're not accountable to anybody.
Yeah.
But then the second I land, if I land and I turn on my phone and like there's no text messages come in, I'm like, that's it.
Right. But there is something so sacred about that space of being on an airplane and having no cell service and being allowed to be alone in a way that feels like it's not because nobody's texting you, because there's the promise of 30 texts on the other side. Yeah. And it's like,
that's exactly what it is.
So good. And then you have the freedom to just do whatever the hell you want to do, right? Right? You can watch a shitty movie if you want to. Like eat the cheese plate, or like have like 5 Bloody Marys, and it's you have all this permission to be alone because there's the like potential of all of what's about to await you when you switch off of airplane mode. So I love the flight.
That's so interesting because it's about like possibility. It's like everything is possible in that moment is what you're saying.
Oh yeah.
I'm also reading that we're talking about like something's imposed upon us. Like it's like it's not like I've done something wrong. It's like this is a set of circumstances that are going to impose here, so then I can just like live it up within this framework. But, like, what about you, Rachel?
You have no choice.
I mean, I'm along the same. I got in my 20s. I was lonely and alone for a lot of the time. So I figured out how to really like chill with myself, which I think was a really good skill. I love being alone. It's weird because now that I'm never alone, it's harder for me to be alone when I am alone. But I like love just watching horrible reality television. I love like not worrying what I look like, which is a weird thing to say, but like, you know, just like rolling out of bed and wearing my pajamas all day. Yeah, mostly it's just, like what, just like being in bed as much as I want to be. Yeah, but being alone seems really luxurious to me. Yeah.
You should come to New York for a pandemic and get an apartment. I'm just kidding. But I remember during the pandemic, in fact, I mean, which is ongoing, but I read one of your essays from your 20s, and it was a lot about loneliness in some sense, even though it was about like kind of unhealthily trying to avoid it. And I felt so much less alone reading it. I was like, it just really helped me in many, many ways. But anyway, yeah, I think that for me, the best non-loneliness while alone is writing. If I'm in a way that if I'm like working on something that I'm so excited about, I mean, like I could be alone forever in some sense. Because I'm visualizing, maybe this is weird, but I think I visualize readers while I write. And so that like feels, because when I started writing, it was on a blog, and because I was lonely, I was living in Boston and I knew nobody except for one of our mutual friends who I wasn't yet friends with. And I would come home every night and I had a blog and I would just write on it. And it was
I didn't even know this.
I know, it's pretty embarrassing, but it kept me so much less lonely. And so I now, to this day, if I'm writing something I'm excited about, I visualize, like, I actually write it still, weirdly. I still write in the blog template.
You do?
Yeah, I never publish it, but I write it, and I write things, and I used to write things in Facebook notes, because that's how I transferred, anyway. And I just visualized an audience, and that always helps me. So I feel so much less alone when I'm, like, with readers, even if they're imaginary.
That's amazing. I can't believe I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I think back to that time and I'm like, oh, weird that that's a different me. Now I don't know. But anyway, yeah.
But it's so interesting what you're saying about readers. I mean, I've never really understood when people say, like, I just write for myself. Like, a lot of people say that, and I've always been like, that must be really nice. But like, I don't have that feeling at all. And it seems like you do. Like, the way that you actually are motivating yourself to like feel a sort of sense of connection when you're writing is by like creating the sensation of an audience or of like a viewer or something.
Oh, 150%. And like, even I had this essay that I've been like working on, but not really in the mood to work on. And today I imagined that I was going to read it for you guys even, and it helped me to work on it. Yeah. So I always need a reader, but it seems really noble not to. Rachel, do you? I feel like you don't need one. I can totally tell you don't.
I feel like if I thought about readers, I would never write anything. I think it would totally psych me out. I guess I am writing to sort of please myself and impress myself. You know, like if it's boring to me, then it's nothing, you know? And yeah, and so my writing practice is really, it's a lot more sort of about knowing myself, because in that way I kind of am trying to ward off the loneliness too, I think. Like knowing myself in some way, that sounds so self-involved and narcissistic, but I'm just trying to like know what's going on with Rachel Yoder a little bit better, so I can like be a better person when I come into community with other people. And so yeah, writing feels like going into a quiet, alone, sacred space for me, which is really restorative.
That's great. Yeah, I know, I get that. I feel like it can maybe be both in some way. But I'm wondering, Kristen, like, as I hate to like bring up the sort of elephant in the room of loneliness, but like as the pandemic took hold while you were working on this, or while you were like finishing this, I guess, did you start to think about writing about loneliness in a different way? And did it start to like, I don't know, because it was like wrested out. It's almost like the like topic feels like it must have been wrested out of your hands in some way because it became this huge thing that everyone was grappling with in a really public way.
Yeah, it was for sure. I mean, like when I started writing about loneliness, people didn't really talk about loneliness because it's like, it felt like there's a pretty big stigma, I think, still around loneliness that has changed a little bit during the pandemic. But I think like the loneliness of the pandemic is super different from the loneliness that I was writing about in the book, which is a sort of like ideological like framework in America that has created a system in which we're all isolated from each other.
Right.
And then the imposed isolation of like a global pandemic. And there was like a kind of solidarity in the pandemic, or, the pandemic was horrible. It has been horrible, obviously, for everyone, and for some more than others. But for me, it wasn't the loneliest time. It was one of the scariest times, but I didn't feel lonely in the way I have in other ways, because the loneliness felt so, for the whole beginning, it was still like, it was like this like state of panic. It was like, it wasn't so much loneliness as it was like confusion, terror, like misunderstanding. Like, I mean, I remember Rachel, Zaina, Kristen, and two of our friends, Carrie and Ariel, started Zooming together every week during the pandemic. And we would come on and just be like, what? In the beginning, there was this sort of like, what is happening quality that I think, looking back, was really important to have, because I think we would have all fallen into despair so quickly if we had known what was coming,
Like, yeah, of course.
And I mean, for us too, it like brought us, I mean, into closer contact.
Yeah.
Like we were not Zooming before that. We were not, having our group text or anything before.
Yeah.
And so, there was this sort of solidarity in our isolation.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because in a way it feels like, and maybe this is totally overstating it, but the problems that you identify in the book and the like sort of way you describe them, it's almost as if in some ways the pandemic, the ways that people handle the pandemic rise to the challenge of combating that kind of loneliness. Because like you would look around in these moments of fear and despair and you'd see people like helping, like people getting in like mutual aid, just people trying to like find community in any way they could. And it was like, so I don't know. So I see what you say I see what you're saying when you say that the pandemic wasn't the loneliest time, because in ways the pandemic was communal, like it created that. So
for sure. Yeah. And I also know that obviously I have a friend who, she had a roommate during the pandemic, and they were both single, and she said that watching another woman go through the pandemic in the same home as her was a kind of a horrifying experience for her in the end, because they didn't experience the pandemic the same, even though their lives were very similar. And that was so lonely for her to see someone else be like kind of okay, and adapt maybe faster than she did. And I think that's so interesting. And I always try to remind myself that just like an experience of loneliness, like our experience of the last year and a half have been so varied. And like I was extremely lucky to have a garden and a partner, in my house. And I can't imagine, what it would have been like for me if my circumstances were different. So it's so hard to say like universally kind of what it was like, but it was definitely very strange, like doing, edits on the book when this thing was happening, and trying to figure out like, do I have to change this book? Like, is this a different thing now? But in the end, I decided I didn't want it to be a pandemic book, and that like the problems I was talking about were maybe more longer term than the problems of the pandemic. And I mean, we'll see how it all looks in 5 years. Maybe we'll be in the middle of I'm sure we'll be in the middle of some new nightmare, but.
No, it's just interesting because as somebody from so I'm Palestinian and I come from a very community-based culture. Your book is I am obsessed with it because it points out these things that I've been feeling and thinking for so many years as someone who sees like other ways of living and sort of problems that are very specific to a certain like kind of individualistic culture. And I've been wanting to like scream about them to people I've seen suffering, and like you just do so. And it's so, it's just like, it's such a nuanced thing that you really, I don't know, elevate. So I'm so grateful for it. It just says exactly what I've been feeling and thinking about, like what is going on. So it's really great. And you're right. It's funny because it totally transcends the pandemic 100%. I mean, it's been in place for such a long time. So anyway. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's strange to like write in a moment. I mean, like Zaina, I don't know if you felt this way at all, like with your book, like writing in a certain political moment or something like that, which I also think is a kind of, it's like a complication of writing, but it also like relating to loneliness can be like, it can be, I think, very challenging to feel like sort of, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but like we're obviously, we all live within like a political cultural moment at all times. And then we have like our sort of personal obsessions or interests. And I think it can be sometimes kind of jarring or lonely to kind of have to like reconcile those things and make sense of both of those things or all of those things at once as a writer. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
That's what I'm saying.
Because you're writing from this place of not thinking about all of that.
Yeah.
Usually, you're writing about your obsessions, and then you have to sort of at some point you start to recognize a larger context that you're sort of speaking to, and then you kind of try and like think about how these speak to one another. But I think so much of the writing, and I don't know, it happens in a way that's like as narrow as much as it can not be tied to a specific cultural or political moment, but because the hope is that you are going even deeper than that, such that you can speak to that moment in a way that even if it wasn't the moment, it still sort of speaks to the things that are driving that moment. If that makes sense. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think both of your books too speak to this sort of, loneliness is so much about the feeling that you're not understood and that you're not seen. Yeah. And I think that's something that is going on like a macro level and on a political level, this stratification that we see, people like being unable to see or understand each other and just sort of going into their camps.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like without you even really perhaps intending it, like your own stories become, they are inherently like part of what's going on in the culture and are speaking to it. And really, I mean, that's what our stories are, right? They're speaking to like this whole thing, this whole like soup, this cosmic soup. And we're all of our stories are coming out of that. And so they both seem like books that are very much like of their time and also timeless, which
but yours
why they're
too.
so good.
Yours too, for the same reason, because exactly as you're saying, it's this thing of like seeing and like feeling unseen in different various contexts, and like that's exactly the sort of, I think if we were to find a way to like unify these outside of just like loneliness, like indeed there's this like theme of like being seen and not being seen, and I think that's absolutely. And it speaks to like, a larger thing that's happening due to like stratification of society and even just like, I don't know, non sort of awareness or inclusivity or something like that. So yeah.
And I think that's why Kristen, why your book is so powerful, right? And I'm also very curious. I want to hear more about you asking people if they're lonely and your experience of doing that, because it's a way, just talking to someone about their loneliness is a way of like cutting through every single, like political or social divide you might have with them, and like going to something that's like really cool. It's like the actual issue. It's the actual issue.
Yeah.
Like, are you lonely? How do you not feel seen? How do you not feel understood? It's like a way of coming into conversation with someone who's very different than you in a really like vulnerable way. And that's that's like the power and the beauty of your book. And so I'm wondering if you have any, because again, we were chatting on the group chat and you were like, oh, you need to ask your dermatologist if she's lonely, you know? Like, and so I'm just wondering like what were some of the most kind of interesting connections you made in like researching and writing the book, or like even just kind of incidentally in your daily life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think when I started writing about loneliness, and then people would be like, what are you working on? And I would say, oh, I'm working on a project about loneliness. I found that so many people would start by telling me stories about their loneliness. They'd be like, oh my God, the loneliest I ever was when I, lived in this town and was working this job and whatever. And like, they'd be so specific, and they were so emotional, and which makes sense. It's such a horrible, desperate feeling. I mean, like, as I learned from the research, like you're feeling a physical threat when you feel lonely in the same way. Like, so your brain is responding in the same way it does to like a physical threat and to physical pain. Like, your brain can't differentiate between the two, which is why you feel so terrible when you're lonely, because your body's trying to like propel you back towards other people. And I just thought that was like so beautiful, because the stories of people's loneliness are often so unique, and like it's different than just like a sadness or depression. Not that those stories aren't also meaningful, because they are, but there's something very pointed and specific, I think, about a moment of disconnection, because I just think longing creates beautiful stories. I mean, that's probably why we tell stories the most. It's like we're like longing to like make something real, or to like reclaim something. I don't know. What do you guys think?
What do we think, Zaina?
I mean, I think that's exactly right. Like, it's like desperation to connect because of a state of sort of longing. And I don't know. I mean, I think writers, there's something about, I had a professor once that was like, you guys both know her. Her name's Honor Moore, but she was like, you will always be lonely and longing. I was like, and she's like, and that's why you're a writer. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better about constantly being sad. It also really speaks to the nature of, I guess.
Do you think that writers are inherently lonely people?
Oh yeah, I think writers are inherently always feeling like they're on the outside in some way, like in that scene you read.
But there's also something really, really, again, like generative and beautiful about it, because writers always want to show themselves. They want to be understood. They like want to be in communion with other people via this medium.
Yeah.
There's that great Steinbeck quote, which I will butcher, but like, how we're like distant stars trying to like communicate with people like light years away. And I think there's something really wonderful about being in touch with, like, we get to be in touch with that, and not everyone has that experience. And there's something, I'm not here to like laud suffering, but there's something really beautiful about being in touch with longing.
And having a way around it. Yeah, go ahead. Like, or through which to express it. That's it. Yeah.
I think sometimes there's like a kind of like a silliness around, like, there's like this kind of like romanticized, like, lonely writer, like the sort of like misunderstood genius that I feel like that's usually attributed to like men, like male writers in media.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like women don't really get that sort of like romantic loneliness.
Right. You write about, like, in your book, you talk about cowboys as being these like romantic, like loners and blah blah blah. But like a lonely, sad woman is like, or a lonely woman.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, that's tragic. Like, no one can look at that.
Is it? I think spinsters are. I'm like, oh, she's probably really interesting. She probably has like a lot going on. Like she has some real. She like can go deep with you about knitting. Like she can tell you some shit about knitting. You know, that's going to be really fascinating.
That's amazing. I know, right? Spinster is just code for like this woman has like multiple activities and like is a very interesting, cool person. It's incredible.
Kristen, do you want to answer this question in the comments? Can you talk a bit about the process of bringing all of your book, the experience, research, analysis together and creating the structure that you ended up with in the book?
So yeah, and then I'd be really interested to hear y'all talk about structure, because for me, structure is one of the last things that comes together. Like I rearranged a book a bajillion times, and I think I go back and forth between whether or not it's a waste of time for me to try to figure out the structure early, because I spend a ton of time in the beginning being like, what's going to happen after this section, or like, how does this fit into that? And then later I'm like, that was dumb, because that actually it should be in this order instead, which happens like 100 times. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm wasting time doing that at the beginning. But then part of me also thinks that it's a very necessary thing to just like continually struggle with the shape of something, because that's how I like figure it out and understand it. But I think the structure is really one of the last things that I figure out in a project. But what about y'all?
I mean, you go first.
I was going to say, I guess it depends on the project. And maybe that's also why I have a preference for story as opposed to, I think essays are really freaking hard. And they sort of drive me insane because of this question of structure. And I find it infuriating, and I don't know how you can ever get it right. You know, you can't get it right, but whatever. So yeah, that's why I kind of like the sort of conventions of storytelling, like, and then this, and then this, and then this. But yeah, a lot of times, I mean, you're bringing together like all these different modes too, you know, like personal storytelling and research. And I just feel like that is such a jigsaw puzzle. For me, usually I'm trying to I do have a sort of speaking voice in my head when I'm trying to figure out structure, and it kind of is like, I hear it. So the end of a section, and then what would the speaker say next, and starting a new section, like where would the sort of, it's almost like I'm thinking of it in terms of a movie, like what would happen next. And that's how I sort of feel my way through structure.
I like that. Yeah, I think structure is really hard. I spent most of the writing of my book was the structure and like taping the pages to the wall and figuring out what went where and like what vignette fits in between what present day scene and like how did the different, I don't know. I think structure is incredibly, incredibly challenging and, you know, much of the work of a project. And yeah, in your case, having to sort of blend together all those different, I mean, I was just looking at, as you were sharing your screen, I was like, gosh, like not only are you telling this story and like, you know, incorporating bits of memoir, incorporating reportage, but you're also drawing these drawings that are so intricate and like authentic. It's just so much to have to structure. So yeah.
It's so many decisions to make. And it does seem very, like you're a director. You're not just a writer. You're directing this, you know, visual and textual experience of the book.
Well, that's I think that's a very generous word for what it is. I mean, I think that drawing is much easier than writing. Like drawing, like when you make a mistake in a drawing, it's like, okay, I'll just like fix it. But like, I don't know how to fix a structural problem in a book in the way that I'm just like, that house looks bad, I should erase it and draw a new one. You know what I mean? It's like a little bit clearer cut in drawing when it's failing to me, or like how it's failing. Or I could just be like, never mind, I can't draw a house. I'm just going to draw something else because this house is so ugly. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, you can replace it, which I think is because this book isn't drawn in panels, like there are so many opportunities to just like draw something else. Whereas like with writing, I don't totally know that you always have that option. You know what I mean? It's like you have to write this scene or this idea. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It does seem writing. Yeah. The profound thing I was going to say is writing is really hard.
Writing is the worst. I hate writing so much. Zaina, I was feeling very jealous of you because you were like, yeah, you know, like when you're just like really excited about what you're writing. And I was like, I don't know what that feels like.
Oh my God. Oh, I mean, it's been a while since I felt that way. So I did feel it today though, when I was like, again, like just having you guys I was like revising something, thinking about you guys. I didn't end up reading it, but it was still helpful to imagine that I would. So anyway.
Esther in the chat is saying, I love the structure of your book, Zaina. It was woven expertly, and I could not agree more.
Thank you so much. Oh, here's the chat. Thanks so much, Esther. Oh, it's so nice to see you. That's lovely to hear. Esther.
Hi. Sorry to barge in here, but we are wrapping up. We're reaching the end of our hour. So if our viewers in the chat, if you have any last questions you want to ask these three before they leave us for the evening, I just want to say thank all of you for this amazing discussion. It was so nice to just sit back and kind of hear everybody put words to all of these feelings that I'm sure all of us have been, experiencing over the past year in our lives. I don't know, Rachel, hearing you talk about your 20s, Zaina talking about, this longing for other places. It was just really a magical talk. So thank you guys all so much. So if anybody has any questions in the chat, otherwise, I thought it might be kind of nice to finish up. I had a question for the three of you. If there are any small kind of magical things that you found to kind of counteract this loneliness that you feel, if there's anything that you kind of notice in everyday life that's a unifying feeling and you're like, oh wow, I feel much more connected having noticed this thing.
It's such a nice question. For me, I would say that it's about learning about loneliness, I feel less lonely. By understanding that there's a biological benefit to loneliness, and that loneliness is just a warning bell in the same way that feeling hungry or thirsty is. And it's just saying, hey, you need to do something about this. You need to connect with someone. And I think that has helped me understand how universal it is. And that makes me feel, I think, more in control of it, or even sometimes appreciative for it in a way that before it felt like something I was doing wrong.
Yeah.
I think for me, something I've found that makes me feel less lonely is I don't tend to share a lot of my feelings with other people. I tend to keep a lot of what's going on for me inside, which can be pretty lonely. And this past year, I've been practicing sort of telling the truth and revealing myself to other people in ways that is deeply uncomfortable and I really don't want to do. And it has made me feel so much less lonely. And I've been terrified of it for so long. And it's actually been a really freeing thing. Just to welcome to my therapy session. But yeah, it's been nice to know that I can show other people that they're not going to run away screaming. In fact, they're going to want to get to know me more. So
yeah. Yeah, I guess, that's great. I think I would say anything that puts me outside of my comfort zone usually makes me less lonely, because that often involves interacting with people that I would have never crossed paths with in some way. And so, it's been hard this year to find ways to put oneself outside of one's comfort zone, but anytime there's been an opportunity to do so, I've taken it. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Steph, and to everybody at Makers and Quinn, and to Rachel and Zaina.
Oh, thank you. This has made me feel heck of a lot less lonely.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, thanks for including us in the celebration of your book, Kristen, which is gorgeous. And absolutely everyone should pick up a copy. It'll make you feel less lonely. That's something you can do to feel less lonely.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of, if you would like to purchase a copy of CQ or Night Bitch or You Exist Too Much, I'm going to pop the Majors and Quinn phone number into the chat. Our website is unfortunately experiencing some difficulties processing credit cards right now, but you can call into the store and place an order over the phone. We ship internationally, anywhere in the world. So definitely call in, pick up these 3 amazing books, and we will see you all guys at our next literary event. So thanks so much for spending the time with us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, friends. Bye.
Yeah, have a lovely evening.